The day she was left behind, the morning air carried a sharp chill that seemed to linger longer than it should. Gray clouds stretched across the sky, casting a dull shadow over the quiet nursing facility at the edge of town. A silver sedan rolled slowly into the parking lot and came to a stop near the entrance. The engine fell silent, but no one moved. Inside the car, tension hung heavier than the silence itself. "We can't keep doing this," the eldest son muttered, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "We've tried everything." His younger sister looked away, blinking back tears she refused to let anyone see. "There wasn't another choice," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. From the back seat, their elderly mother carefully reached for the faded brown suitcase resting beside her. The leather was cracked from decades of use, its corners worn smooth by countless journeys. It was the only piece of luggage she carried. No family photographs, no treasured keepsakes, no boxes filled with a lifetime of memories, just one old suitcase. She stepped out slowly, leaning on her cane as the wind tugged gently at her silver hair. For a brief moment she looked at the building before turning back toward her children. No accusations, no pleading, no anger, only quiet eyes that had seen more than either of them could imagine. The youngest daughter forced herself to speak. "We'll visit soon." The promise sounded hollow the moment it left her lips. Their mother offered a faint smile, one so calm it felt almost impossible. "I know," she replied softly. The words should have brought comfort, yet they only deepened the unease settling inside the car. As they turned to leave, another argument erupted between the siblings. "You think this is easy for me," the son snapped. "So why does it feel like we're abandoning her?" "Because that's exactly what it looks like. We couldn't afford the care anymore. We didn't have room. We had no choice." Each explanation sounded weaker than the last. Behind them, the old woman remained standing beside her weathered suitcase, watching without interrupting. She neither defended them nor condemned them. Instead, she simply waited. Finally, the car pulled away. Through the rear window, her children saw her growing smaller in the distance until she became only a lonely figure standing beneath the overcast sky. Neither of them noticed that she never waved goodbye. She watched until the car disappeared beyond the front gates. Then, almost too quietly for anyone to hear, she whispered into the empty morning air, "One day, you'll understand." There was no bitterness in her voice, only certainty. Inside the nursing home, a receptionist approached to help with her suitcase. The elderly woman thanked her politely but insisted on carrying it herself. Though it looked ordinary, she held it with unusual care, as if its contents were more valuable than anyone could imagine. Several residents glanced curiously in her direction. One staff member noticed the faded initials embossed on the handle. Another wondered why someone arriving with so little seemed so remarkably composed. What no one knew was that this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a secret that had been buried for decades, a secret her own children believed had disappeared forever. And by the time they uncovered the truth, everything they thought they knew about their mother, their family, and the fortune they believed was long gone would be changed forever. Long before the quiet halls of the nursing home, before the lonely suitcase and the whispered farewell, Elinor's life had been defined by one simple truth: her children always came first. She had been widowed at just 38. One ordinary afternoon, her husband had kissed her goodbye before leaving for work. He never came home. In a single day, grief became responsibility. With three frightened children looking to her for answers she didn't have, Elinor made herself a promise. No matter how difficult life became, they would never feel abandoned. She kept that promise. By day, she worked as a waitress, balancing heavy trays with aching feet and a smile that hid her exhaustion. At night, she cleaned office buildings after everyone else had gone home. On weekends, she mended clothes for neighbors, earning just enough to cover another grocery bill or another pair of school shoes. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford. More than once, she quietly claimed she wasn't hungry, insisting she'd already eaten before serving the last portions to her children. They never noticed she drank only tea while they finished the meal she had prepared. When her eldest son dreamed of becoming an engineer, she sold the pearl necklace her late husband had given her on their 10th anniversary. She smiled as she handed over the tuition payment, never mentioning what it had cost her. Years later, when her daughter wanted a home of her own, Elinor emptied nearly every dollar from her savings to cover the down payment. "This is too much," her daughter had protested. "It isn't too much," Elinor replied with a gentle smile. "It's what mothers do." When her youngest son struggled to keep his small business alive, she quietly refinanced the house she had spent decades paying off. She never told anyone she had taken on new debt in her 70s just to give him another chance. Every sacrifice disappeared behind the same comforting words. As long as you're happy. Birthdays passed without gifts for herself. Vacations remained distant dreams. New clothes were always postponed until next year. Next year never came. Instead, every extra dollar became someone else's opportunity, someone else's future, someone else's comfort. Her children accepted each act of generosity with sincere gratitude at first. They hugged her tightly, promised to repay her someday, and swore they would always take care of her when she grew old. But life has a quiet way of reshaping promises. Successful careers replaced family dinners. Larger homes replaced humble beginnings. Luxury cars replaced the rusted station wagon their mother had driven until it could no longer start. Phone calls became shorter. Holiday visits became less frequent. Eventually, even conversations felt rushed, as though spending time with her had become another obligation squeezed between meetings and vacations. None of them stopped to ask what she needed. None of them noticed the growing stack of unopened medical bills tucked neatly inside a kitchen drawer. Yet every evening, after the house had fallen silent, Elinor sat at the small wooden desk by her bedroom window. Under the warm glow of an aging lamp, she carefully filled page after page in weathered journals, recording memories, family stories, dates, names, and promises she wanted history to remember. When she finished writing, she folded fragile documents with deliberate care, old deeds, faded letters, financial records, and handwritten notes, and placed them into a sealed envelope before locking everything away in a place no one ever thought to search. To anyone else, they were simply forgotten papers. To Elinor, they were pieces of a truth waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. A truth that one day would force her children to confront everything they had forgotten, and everything their mother had quietly protected all along. Success arrived quietly, one child at a time. The eldest son became a respected engineer, living in a spacious suburban home where every room reflected years of hard work. The daughter built a successful career in real estate, proudly sharing photos of luxury listings and weekend vacations. The youngest son eventually turned his struggling business into a profitable company, finally enjoying the financial security he had once dreamed about. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect family. No one saw how distance had slowly replaced devotion. At first, the changes were almost impossible to notice. Phone calls that once lasted an hour became hurried conversations ending with, "I'll call you later." Birthdays were celebrated with expensive gifts delivered by courier instead of warm embraces. Holiday dinners became difficult to schedule because everyone was simply too busy. Elinor never complained. She always answered with the same gentle smile. "I understand." But understanding did not make the silence any less painful. As the years passed, her health began to decline. Routine doctor visits turned into specialist appointments. Prescription bottles multiplied across the kitchen counter, and medical bills started arriving faster than she could organize them. It wasn't long before family conversations changed. "They're recommending another treatment," the eldest son sighed. "Do you know how much that's going to cost?" The daughter folded her arms. "We're all contributing already. I can't keep rearranging my life every time something happens." The youngest son glanced away. "I've got employees depending on me. I can't just leave work every week." Each excuse sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a wall no one wanted to climb. Soon, every family gathering ended with the same uncomfortable question: "Who's taking mom this month?" Silence became the only answer. Each sibling secretly believed the others had more time, more money, or a greater responsibility. No one wanted to admit the painful truth. They weren't arguing about caring for their mother anymore. They were arguing about the inconvenience of caring for her. Then the conversations took an even darker turn. "What about the house?" the daughter asked one evening, spreading paperwork across the dining table. "It's too expensive to maintain," her older brother replied. "And eventually we'll have to deal with it anyway," the youngest added. The discussion shifted from concern to calculation. Property value, taxes, maintenance costs, future inheritance. No one mentioned the memories hidden within those walls, the faded pencil marks measuring childhood heights, the kitchen where Alina had stretched simple meals into family feasts, or the front porch where she had waited countless evenings for her children to come home safely. To them, it had become an asset, a number on a piece of paper. The decision came faster than anyone expected. If we sell now, the daughter said confidently, we'll avoid bigger expenses later. And Mom doesn't really need the house anymore, someone quietly replied. They agreed. Without sitting down to explain everything honestly, they handled the paperwork themselves, presenting Alina with only the parts they wanted her to hear. She listened without interruption, signed where they pointed, and lowered the pen with trembling hands. None of them noticed the lingering glance she gave the old house before walking away. It wasn't the loss of the home that broke her heart. It was realizing that the people she had spent a lifetime protecting no longer understood what they had truly taken from her. And none of them had any idea that the greatest treasure connected to that house had never been inside its walls at all. The first few weeks inside the nursing home passed almost unnoticed. Alina's room was small, with a single window overlooking a quiet garden where robins gathered each morning. There was little to decorate the space: a neatly made bed, a wooden dresser, a comfortable chair, and the worn brown suitcase she had carried with such care. It remained tucked beneath the bed, untouched by everyone except her. She asked for very little. She complained about nothing. Before long, the staff began noticing something her own family had forgotten years earlier. She remembered names. The young nurse working the night shift was always greeted with, "How is your little boy feeling today?" The volunteer who delivered books was asked whether her college exams had gone well. Even the groundskeeper found himself lingering for a few extra minutes, grateful that someone still asked about his aching back. In a place where loneliness often echoed through the hallways, Alina became an unexpected source of comfort. She also formed a quiet friendship with Arthur, an elderly widower who spent most afternoons watching birds from the garden bench. They spoke about ordinary things, the changing seasons, old songs on the radio, and memories that seemed brighter each time they were shared. Neither asked the other about regret. Both understood it without words. As the weeks turned into months, Alina settled into a gentle routine. Every evening, after dinner trays had been cleared away and the corridors grew still, she opened the old suitcase. Inside were several leather-bound journals, a bundle of yellowed documents tied with faded blue ribbon, and a stack of crisp stationery. Under the soft glow of her bedside lamp, she began writing. One letter. Then another. Then another. Some were only a page long. Others stretched across several sheets, written slowly in her elegant handwriting. When she finished each one, she folded it carefully, sealed it inside an envelope, and wrote a name across the front. She never mailed them. Instead, she arranged them neatly inside the suitcase, adding to the growing collection night after night. The nurses assumed she was writing farewell letters. Arthur quietly wondered if she was recording memories for her grandchildren. No one asked, and Alina never explained. One rainy afternoon, a new volunteer arrived at the nursing home to provide free legal assistance for residents needing help with wills, estates, or personal affairs. His name was Daniel Mercer, a soft-spoken lawyer with kind eyes and a habit of listening far more than he spoke. When Alina requested a private meeting, he expected routine paperwork. Instead, she placed one weathered journal on the table between them. "I've carried this story for many years," she said gently. "It's finally time someone else knows the truth." Daniel listened for nearly 3 hours without interrupting. By the time she finished, his expression had completely changed. He leaned back in stunned silence before quietly asking, "Does anyone else know?" Alina slowly shook her head. "They believe there is nothing left," she replied. "They've believed that for a very long time." The lawyer glanced at the journals, then at the carefully protected documents resting inside the old suitcase. For the first time, someone besides Elinor understood that these weren't simply letters from an aging mother preparing to say goodbye. They were pieces of a carefully preserved truth. A truth capable of rewriting her family's entire history. And if it was revealed at the right moment, it would force every one of her children to face a choice that no amount of money could ever undo. Long before her children argued over medical bills, property values, or inheritance, Elinor had made a decision that would shape every year of their lives. It was a decision she never spoke about. Not because she was ashamed of it. Because she believed some burdens were meant to be carried by parents alone. After her husband's sudden death, sympathy from friends and neighbors quickly faded. What remained were unopened envelopes arriving almost daily. Past due notices, loan agreements, final demands. Each letter revealed another piece of a financial nightmare her husband had desperately tried to hide. Unknown to everyone, including their own children, he had borrowed heavily to keep his struggling business alive. He had signed personal guarantees, refinanced assets in secret, and convinced himself he would repay everything before anyone ever found out. He never got the chance. Within weeks of his funeral, creditors began circling. There were whispers that the family could lose everything. Some advised Elinor to declare bankruptcy. Others urged her to sell the house immediately and move away before the debts swallowed what little remained. She listened politely. Then she quietly chose a different path. Working endless hours, she negotiated with creditors one by one, sold the few valuables she still owned, and accepted every extra job she could find. She protected the family home, paid down obligations little by little, and shielded her children from conversations no child should have to hear. They never knew how close they had come to losing everything. They never knew that some birthdays had been celebrated only because their mother had skipped another payment on herself instead of on the debts. To them, childhood had felt safe. To Elinor, every peaceful dinner had been another small victory won through sacrifice. Even after the debts were finally settled, she never revealed the truth. She wanted her children to remember their father as the loving man who tucked them into bed each night, not as a man crushed by impossible decisions and silent fear. She protected his memory as fiercely as she had protected their future. Now, decades later, those same children gathered around dining tables for very different conversations. "Has anyone seen Mom's financial records?" the eldest son asked. "There can't be much left," his sister replied, scrolling through property estimates on her phone. "After the nursing home costs, I doubt there's anything worth dividing." The youngest frowned. What if she has another account somewhere? What if Dad left something we never knew about? Their questions no longer centered on Elinor's well-being. Instead, they searched for anything that might still carry financial value. Every old receipt became a clue. Every forgotten document became a possibility. They convinced themselves they were simply being practical. But beneath the surface, hope had quietly transformed into expectation. None of them realized how painfully ironic it was. For years, they had believed their mother possessed almost nothing. Yet the one thing they never thought to ask was what she had spent a lifetime protecting. Back at the nursing home, Daniel Mercer carefully turned another page of Elinor's journals. Each entry connected to faded legal documents, handwritten receipts, and letters that completed pieces of a puzzle spanning decades. When he looked up, his voice was barely above a whisper. "So, this changes everything." Elinor offered the same calm smile she had worn the day her children drove away. "It will," she said softly. "But only when they're finally ready to understand what their father left behind, and what I chose to protect." For the first time, the truth no longer felt like a memory buried in the past. It felt like a door waiting to be opened. And behind it lay one final secret that would force her children to question everything they believed about their family's history, and about the woman they had so easily left behind. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the garden outside Elinor's window in shades of gold and crimson. The trees she had watched each morning slowly surrendered their leaves, one by one, as though even nature understood that every season must eventually come to an end. Inside the nursing home, the changes were harder to ignore. The walks that had once taken her to the garden bench became shorter. Some afternoons, she no longer had the strength to leave her room. The nurses noticed her hands trembling as she lifted a teacup. Arthur noticed the empty chair beside the window more often than not. Even her gentle smile seemed touched by a weariness it had never shown before. When the doctor quietly explained that her heart was growing weaker, Elinor simply nodded. "I've had a beautiful life," she said. "What I hope for now is one more family conversation." That evening, she asked a nurse to help her make 3 phone calls. The first went to her eldest son. He answered after several rings. "Mom, I'm just walking into a meeting." "I won't keep you long," Elinor said softly. "I was wondering if you might visit this week. I'd love to see you." A long silence followed. "I'll try, things are hectic right now." "I understand." He promised to call back. He never did. The second call reached her daughter. "I'm so sorry," she said after hearing her mother's quiet request. "The kids have activities all weekend, maybe next week." "Next week sounds lovely." But Elinor's voice carried no expectation, only kindness. The final call went unanswered. Her youngest son's voicemail picked up almost immediately. She left a simple message. "I was thinking about you today. If you have time, I'd enjoy seeing you. Take care of yourself." Days passed. No one came. Flowers arrived from a delivery service. A short text message asked how she was feeling. Another promised we'll visit soon. Each message was sincere in its own way. Each arrived instead of the person she had hoped to see. Yet Elinor never complained. She thanked every nurse who checked on her. She smiled at every volunteer who stopped by her room. When Arthur apologized on behalf of people who didn't understand how precious time could be, she gently shook her head. "They'll understand someday," she whispered. "I only hope it isn't too late." The following afternoon, Daniel Mercer returned with several legal documents Elinor had requested. She placed the stack of handwritten letters beside her weathered journals, then reached for one final envelope unlike all the others. It was thicker, heavier. Its seal was pressed carefully with warm wax. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, she wrote only 4 words. "Open together." Daniel watched as she held the envelope for a long moment before placing something inside that he could not see. "Are you certain you don't want them to read it now?" he asked quietly. Elinor smiled with peaceful certainty. "No. They must be together." She handed him the envelope. "I want you to witness it being sealed." Without another word, Daniel signed the document confirming its custody and locked the envelope inside his briefcase. He had read enough of Elinor's story to know that whatever rested inside was far more than an ordinary farewell. It was the final piece of a puzzle decades in the making. A truth so important that it could only be revealed when every one of her children stood together to hear it. And until that moment arrived, its secret would remain untouched. The funeral took place beneath a pale winter sky. There were no grand floral displays. No long procession of luxury cars. Just a small gathering of family, a handful of nursing home staff, Arthur sitting quietly in the front row, and the nurses who had come to love Elinor during the final months of her life. Soft hymns echoed through the chapel as photographs from different chapters of her life appeared on a screen. A young bride smiling beside her husband. A mother holding 3 laughing children. A woman standing proudly at college graduations. Holiday dinners. Birthday cakes. Simple moments that once ordinary had quietly become priceless. The minister spoke gently about sacrifice, kindness, and a life measured not by possessions but by the love freely given to others. Several nurses wiped away tears. Arthur lowered his head in silent prayer. Her children listened politely, but each carried thoughts they dared not voice aloud. After the service ended, conversations drifted away from memories and toward practical matters. I suppose we'll need to sort out her accounts, the eldest son said as they walked toward the parking lot. There can't be much left, his sister replied. The nursing home fees must have used almost everything. The youngest frowned. Unless she kept something from us. His words lingered in the cold air. Hidden savings. Forgotten investments. An old insurance policy. Each possibility grew larger the more they discussed it. What began as quiet curiosity soon became uneasy speculation. 3 days later, they gathered in Daniel Mercer's office, expecting the usual reading of a will. Instead, the lawyer remained standing, his expression calm but unusually firm. I understand why you're here, he began, but your mother left very specific instructions. The siblings exchanged puzzled glances. Daniel opened a folder and carefully removed a sealed document. Mrs. Aliner asked that no estate meeting take place today. What do you mean? The daughter asked. She instructed that all 3 of you return exactly 30 days after her funeral. The eldest son frowned. 30 days, why? Daniel slowly shook his head. She did not explain. She only insisted that every sibling be present before anything is opened or discussed. And if one of us can't make it, the youngest asked. Then nothing happens. Silence settled over the room. Daniel reached into his briefcase and placed a single envelope on the table. Its cream-colored paper had begun to yellow with age, but the wax seal remained perfectly intact. Across the front, written in Aliner's unmistakable handwriting, were the same 4 words. Open together. No names. No explanation. Only a quiet command. I've been instructed to keep this sealed until all of you are sitting together 30 days from today, Daniel said. Not a day sooner. The meeting ended almost as quickly as it had begun. The siblings walked out with more questions than answers. Over the following weeks, uncertainty spread through the family. An aunt quietly wondered if Aliner had hidden a fortune. A cousin whispered that perhaps there were unpaid debts no one knew about. Friends speculated she had rewritten her will. Others suggested she had uncovered an old family secret before her death. Even the siblings began questioning one another. What if she trusted one of us more than the others? What if someone already knows what's inside? What if this delay is part of some kind of test? Old resentments resurfaced with surprising speed. Every unanswered question reopened wounds that had never truly healed. Meanwhile, Daniel kept the envelope locked inside his office safe, untouched exactly as Aliner had requested. Each passing day only made its contents feel more important. Whatever rested inside had enough power to unite or permanently divide the family she had spent her entire life trying to hold together. And with every sunrise bringing them closer to the appointed day, the mystery surrounding Aliner's final message grew impossible to ignore. 30 days passed more slowly than any of the siblings had expected. When the appointed morning finally arrived, they sat together in Daniel Mercer's office for the first time in years. No one spoke beyond a few polite greetings. The silence between them carried the weight of unanswered questions, old regrets, and quiet suspicion. Daniel unlocked a small fireproof box and carefully removed the cream-colored envelope. The wax seal remained unbroken. For a long moment, no one reached for it. It suddenly felt less like an inheritance and more like a judgment. With a steady hand, Daniel broke the seal and unfolded several neatly written pages. He looked at the siblings once before beginning to read. My dear children, if you are hearing these words together, then you have honored my final request. Thank you. Before anything else, I want you to know something I hope you never doubted. I loved you every day of my life. Nothing you could ever do would erase that love. A mother's heart does not keep score, it simply keeps loving. The room grew still. No accusations. No anger. Only kindness. Daniel continued. I have spent many years thinking about what I would say if this day ever came. I could remind you of the nights I stayed awake while you slept. I could list every sacrifice, every worry, every dream I quietly exchanged for yours, but love that demands repayment was never love at all. I gave those things freely and I would choose to do it again. The daughter lowered her eyes. The eldest son's jaw tightened. The youngest stared silently at the table. Daniel turned the page. There is something I never told you. I knew long before the day you left me at the nursing home that you were considering it. I heard conversations you believed I couldn't hear. I saw the worried glances, the whispered discussions about my care, my house, and what should happen next. The siblings looked at one another in stunned disbelief. You may wonder why I never confronted you. The answer is simple. I wanted your choices to be your own. Advice can be ignored, arguments can be forgotten. But the decisions we make when no one is forcing us reveal who we truly are. Every memory from that heartbreaking morning suddenly felt different. Her calm smile. Her peaceful voice. The whispered words. One day you'll understand. She had known. All along. Daniel's voice softened as he read the next passage. I did not allow these events because I stopped loving you. I allowed them because I believed that truth has a gentler teacher than anger. I hoped that one day, when life became quieter and your hearts became still, you would see yourselves honestly, not through my eyes but through your own memories. Silence settled over the room. No one could escape it. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Daniel unfolded the final pages and spoke slowly. Over many years, I wrote journals, letters, and records of our family's life. I documented the joys we shared, the promises we made, the sacrifices we carried, and the choices that shaped us. Not to shame you, not to punish you, but so that nothing important would be forgotten after I was gone. The siblings exchanged shaken glances. Every evening she had spent writing. Every carefully sealed envelope. Every conversation with Daniel. It had never been random. It had all been intentional. Every page had preserved a truth they had been too distracted to notice while she was alive. The letter concluded with words that broke whatever defenses remained. If this letter has brought you pain, I pray it also brings you wisdom. Forgive yourselves, forgive one another, and remember that a family is not measured by what it inherits but by what it chooses to become. If my final gift can bring you back to each other, then I will have left this world at peace. Daniel lowered the pages. No one spoke. No one needed to. In the crushing silence that followed, each sibling finally understood that the greatest inheritance their mother had left behind was not wealth, property, or hidden treasure. It was the undeniable truth of their own choices. And yet, as Daniel quietly reached for another folder resting beside the letter, it became clear that Aline's story and her final surprise was not over just yet. No one moved. The silence left by Aline's final letter seemed almost sacred, until Daniel Mercer quietly reached for the leather portfolio resting beside him. I have one final responsibility, he said. Your mother asked me not only to read her letter but to show you the rest of what she spent years preparing. He carefully lifted several weathered journals onto the conference table. Their worn leather covers bore dates spanning nearly 3 decades. Beside them came neatly organized folders, bundles of handwritten letters tied with faded blue ribbon, and a small wooden box Aline had specifically instructed him not to open until this moment. The siblings stared in disbelief. So, she really documented everything, the eldest son whispered. Daniel nodded. Everything she believed mattered. He opened the first journal. Inside were not lists of grievances or records of disappointment. Instead, every page overflowed with love. She had written about first days of school, birthday candles, scraped knees, graduation ceremonies, family vacations, bedtime stories, and quiet moments no one else would have remembered. Every achievement her children celebrated. She had celebrated twice. Every heartbreak they suffered. She had quietly carried beside them. There were also letters addressed individually. Daniel handed one sealed envelope to each sibling. For your eyes only. Their hands trembled as they read. The eldest son's letter thanked him for becoming the dependable man his father had always hoped he would be, but gently reminded him that providing for a family also meant giving them time. The daughter's letter praised her strength and determination while asking one heartbreaking question. When did success become so heavy that you no longer had room to carry your mother beside it? The youngest son's letter recalled the day Alina refinanced her home to save his struggling business, a sacrifice she had never mentioned aloud. She ended simply, "I never regretted helping you, I only wished you had remembered why I did." Tears began falling silently across the table. Daniel then unfolded the final legal documents. There is one more matter regarding Mrs. Alina's estate. The siblings instinctively straightened. For weeks they had imagined hidden bank accounts, forgotten investments, or a fortune concealed somewhere beyond their reach. Instead, Daniel revealed a very different truth. The modest savings Alina still possessed had been carefully divided months before her passing. Several cherished family heirlooms, including her husband's restored watch, her wedding Bible, handmade quilts, and generations of family photographs, had already been gifted according to her wishes. Not to those who expected them, but to those who had offered genuine kindness during her final chapter. Arthur received the watch because, as Alina wrote, he reminded me that friendship has no expiration date. The Nursing Home Scholarship Fund received a generous charitable gift to help train future caregivers. The young nurse who never rushed through an evening conversation received Alina's treasured recipe collection and handwritten family stories, accompanied by a note that read, "You cared for strangers as though they were your own family. May these remind you that love always leaves something worth passing on." The local volunteer program received funds to provide companionship for elderly people without visitors. Every gift reflected compassion. Every decision rewarded quiet humanity. Daniel looked at the siblings with gentle sympathy. "Your mother never measured people by blood alone." He paused before sliding one final page across the table. It contained no financial award. Only a handwritten message addressed to all three children. "My beloved children, if you expected wealth, I'm afraid I have very little left to give. Nearly everything I owned was spent helping you build your futures. What remains cannot be counted in dollars. My greatest hope is that one day you will discover that compassion is worth more than any inheritance. If you learn that lesson, then you will receive the richest gift I was ever able to leave behind." No one argued. No one protested. At that moment, the emotional cost of their choices became far heavier than anything they had hoped to inherit. For the first time, they understood that Alina's greatest legacy had never been hidden inside a bank account. It had been hidden inside the kind of people she prayed they would still become. Section 10, regret arrives too late. The drive home felt longer than any of them remembered. No one turned on the radio. No one reached for a phone. For the first time in years, silence demanded to be heard. The eldest son sat alone in his study that evening, turning his mother's letter over in his hands. He read the final paragraph again. Then again. Each reading revealed another memory he had buried beneath deadlines and responsibilities. He remembered the late nights she waited awake until he came home safely. The packed lunches she somehow managed to prepare after working 2 jobs. The promise he had made as a young man. "I'll always take care of you, Mom." He covered his face with trembling hands and wept without restraint. Across town, his sister reacted differently. She folded Alina's letter, placed it back inside its envelope, and insisted the estate had been unfair. "We all had difficult lives," she muttered to herself. "She couldn't have expected us to do everything." But even as she spoke, the confidence in her voice faded. The questions Alina had written refused to leave her mind. She could justify her decisions. She could not escape them. The youngest son returned to his office but found himself unable to work. Instead, he reread his personal letter until the paper softened at its folds. Every sentence reminded him of sacrifices he had never fully understood. By sunrise, he drove without a destination until he found himself standing outside the nursing home. The building looked exactly as it had the day they left their mother there. Only now it felt impossibly different. He walked slowly through the garden where Arthur still sat watching the birds. The old man smiled gently. She used to love this bench. The youngest son sat beside him. Neither spoke for several minutes. The quiet carried more honesty than words ever could. Inside the lobby, the nurses remembered Elinor with warmth rather than sorrow. They shared stories of her kindness, her laughter, and the way she comforted frightened residents who had no family left. Listening to them, he realized strangers had known the woman he had slowly stopped seeing. Not because they had more time, but because they had chosen to give her their attention. Weeks later, the three siblings met again, not for legal paperwork but to sort through their mother's journals together. For the first time in years, they listened instead of argued. Some wounds could never be undone. Some moments would never return. The chance to visit one last time had slipped away forever. Yet Elinor had never sought revenge. She had chosen something far more powerful. The truth. It became the mirror that reflected every forgotten promise, every missed opportunity, and every act of love they had taken for granted. Her greatest act of justice was not making her children suffer. It was giving them one final chance to become the people she had believed they could still be. Though regret had arrived too late to change the past, it became the beginning of a different future, one shaped not by entitlement, but by compassion, forgiveness, and the enduring legacy of a mother's unconditional love. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. For the first time since their mother's passing, the siblings had nothing left to argue about. The estate had been settled, the mystery had been answered, yet instead of relief, an unbearable emptiness settled over each of them. They carried it differently. The eldest son locked himself inside his home office, his mother's letter spread across the desk before him. He read every sentence slowly, pausing at the words she had written just for him. Providing for your family also means giving them your time. The sentence shattered him. Memories flooded back, the countless evenings she had waited awake until he returned home, the school lunches she prepared before sunrise after working late into the night, the promises he had made as a young man that he would always care for her. His shoulders shook as years of buried guilt finally broke through. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to cry not for the inheritance he had lost but for the moments he could never reclaim. His sister chose another path. She folded her letter neatly, placed it back inside its envelope, and convinced herself their mother had been unfair. "We all had responsibilities," she whispered to the empty room. "She couldn't expect us to put our lives on hold." The words sounded reasonable. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of Elinor standing alone beside that worn brown suitcase, smiling with heartbreaking peace. No explanation could silence that memory. Meanwhile, the youngest son read his personal letter over and over until the paper had softened at its creases. Each reading uncovered another sacrifice he had overlooked, another act of quiet love he had accepted without understanding its cost. Unable to bear the weight of his regrets, he drove back to the nursing home. The familiar garden was still there. The wooden bench where his mother had spent so many afternoons remained beneath the old maple tree. He sat quietly, tracing the weathered wood with his fingertips, trying to imagine the conversations she had shared with Arthur, the nurses, and the volunteers who had become her second family. Inside, the staff welcomed him warmly. They spoke not of Elinor's final illness but of her kindness, how she remembered birthdays, comforted lonely residents, encouraged exhausted caregivers, and somehow made everyone around her feel seen. Listening to them, he realized strangers had witnessed the best parts of his mother's final chapter because they had simply taken the time to be present. He had not. Weeks later, the three siblings gathered once more, this time without lawyers, paperwork, or expectations. Together, they opened Elinor's journals and read the stories she had preserved with such care. There were tears. There was silence. There were apologies that could never be spoken to the one person who deserved to hear them. In the end, justice did not arrive through punishment or revenge. It arrived through truth. Their mother's final gift was not exposing them to the world, It was allowing them to see themselves with complete honesty. And though regret had come too late to change the past, it became the first step toward becoming the people Alina had believed they could still be. Spring arrived just as it had countless times before. Flowers bloomed along the pathways outside the nursing home, and the once bare maple tree stretched its branches toward the morning sun. Life moved forward, quietly reminding everyone that endings often become the beginning of something unexpected. Several months after Alina's passing, Daniel Mercer returned to the nursing home carrying a box of carefully bound copies of her journals. They had not been edited or rewritten. They simply preserved the stories exactly as she had lived them. With the family's blessing, selected passages were shared with residents, caregivers, volunteers, and local community groups. The stories of sacrifice, forgiveness, and unwavering hope spread far beyond the walls of the nursing home. Residents who had once spent their days in silence began writing down their own memories. Grandchildren visited more often after hearing Alina's story. Volunteers stayed longer, realizing that the greatest gift they could offer someone was not money or flowers, but their time and attention. The charitable gifts Alina had arranged quietly began fulfilling their purpose. The nursing home's caregiver scholarship welcomed its first recipients, young men and women determined to care for the elderly with the same compassion Alina had treasured during her final months. The Community Companionship Program also expanded, matching volunteers with seniors who had no regular visitors. Fewer residents ate meals alone, more birthdays were celebrated, more stories were listened to before they had the chance to disappear forever. Alina's kindness continued reaching people she would never meet. Her children changed as well. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But genuinely. The eldest son began volunteering at the nursing home every Saturday morning, reading aloud to residents who struggled with their eyesight. The daughter organized annual fundraising events for senior care programs, choosing service over status for the first time in years. The youngest son established a small memorial fund in his mother's name, helping elderly people who could no longer afford essential care. None of them spoke about redemption. They simply lived differently. One afternoon, they gathered beneath the same maple tree where Alina had so often sat with Arthur. Together, they placed a small bronze plaque beside the garden bench. It read, "In loving memory of Alina, she taught that love is measured not by what we keep, but by what we give." They stood in silence not because there was nothing left to say, but because they finally understood. Their mother had never wanted them to inherit wealth. She wanted them to inherit compassion. She wanted them to choose people over possessions, forgiveness over pride, and kindness over convenience. That had always been the true legacy hidden inside her weathered suitcase, her handwritten journals, and her final letter. Money could be spent. Property could be sold. Heirlooms could fade with time. But the example of unconditional love, quiet resilience, and unwavering dignity could continue changing lives for generations. And in the end, that became the richest inheritance Alina had ever left behind. Nearly a year had passed. The seasons had completed their quiet circle, yet there were still moments when the absence of Alina felt strangely present, as though her gentle voice had simply drifted into another room. On a cool spring afternoon, her 3 children returned to the nursing home's garden together. No lawyer had called them. No legal documents remained to be signed. They had come because, for the first time in many years, they wanted to be in the place where their mother had found peace when they had failed to give it to her. The maple tree stood taller than ever, its branches casting soft shadows across the familiar wooden bench. Beside it rested the bronze plaque they had placed months earlier. Arthur had passed away not long before, and the nurses often said they liked to imagine the 2 old friends sharing stories once again, somewhere beyond the reach of time. The youngest son quietly unfolded the final page of Alina's last letter. Its edges had become worn from being read so many times. His voice trembled as he began reading aloud. If you remember anything about me, I hope it is not the mistakes we made together but the love that always remained between us." The three siblings lowered their heads. For a long moment no one spoke. Birds sang from the maple branches overhead, and a gentle breeze stirred the flowers lining the garden path. It was the same peaceful place their mother had watched every morning from her window. Only now they finally saw it through her eyes. The daughter turned to the last paragraph. Tears blurred the ink, but she continued. "Do not spend your lives wishing you had one more day with the people you love. Give them your time while they are still here. Forgive before pride steals the chance. Listen before silence becomes permanent." The eldest son looked toward the empty wooden chair that had recently been placed beside the bench. No one sat there. No one ever would. Yet somehow it felt full. Full of bedtime stories. Full of sacrifices no one had noticed. Full of quiet prayers whispered after long days. Full of a mother's unwavering hope that her children would someday find their way back to one another. The chair had become more than a place to sit. It had become a reminder that love leaves an imprint long after a voice has fallen silent. The youngest son took a slow breath and read the final lines Elinor had written. "Love is not measured by what you receive, but by what you choose to give when no one is watching." No one tried to hold back their tears. There was nothing left to defend. Nothing left to inherit. Only lessons to carry forward. As they stood together beneath the maple tree, they understood that their mother's greatest gift had never been hidden in a suitcase, a journal, or a sealed envelope. It had been hidden in every quiet sacrifice they once overlooked. Every meal she skipped so they could eat. Every dream she postponed so theirs could come true. Every act of kindness she offered without expecting recognition. Some losses can never be undone. Some words arrive only after it is too late to answer them. But every new day offers another chance to choose compassion over convenience, gratitude over entitlement, and love over pride. The garden remained still. The empty chair rested beneath the afternoon sunlight. And though Elinor was gone, the legacy she left behind would continue living in every heart willing to remember one simple truth. Family is never defined by what we inherit. It is defined by how deeply we love, how faithfully we forgive, and the choices we make before it becomes too late.